Welcome to Powering the Future Within, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Omari Bouknight, CEO of Resident Link Medical. Each episode, we speak with a leader who is driving the next wave of medical innovation, advancing technologies that are smarter, less invasive, and more connected than ever before. This is where the future of health takes shape. Let's dive in. I'm excited to welcome today's guest, Nada Hanafi, a thought leader who advises medtech companies on regulatory strategy, product development, and clinical research. She is the founder of MedTech Strategy Advisors and previously spent more than 12 years working for the FDA. In today's conversation, we'll explore her perspective on building with intention, navigating the regulatory process, and what it takes to turn ambition into durable outcomes. Nada, welcome to Powering the Future Within.
Thanks, Omari. It's really good to be here.
To start with, you were trained as an engineer, I believe in biomaterials, and then along the way decided to pursue public policy. At what point did you decide that a traditional engineering role wasn't for you?
When I realized I wasn't that great at math. I'm teasing. Um, yeah, I did do my undergrad in biomedical materials engineering, and then I followed up closely with a master's in biomaterials, and this was all at Queen Mary University of London. So in East London, if anyone's familiar. And then after that, I transitioned to the US, started in a small biotech company. And it was within the dental space, which is where my master's had focused on the uptake of fluoride by glass ionomer cements. I'll just leave it at that. So it was in a similar space. But then while I was there, my resume landed at FDA somehow. I guess it was meant to be, the powers above. And then eventually, after a while, I landed at FDA as well and started in the position as a lead reviewer. So you're looking at pre-market submissions coming in, evaluating the evidence and determining if you should let a product get to market, approve it, clear it, or grant it if it's a de novo. And it was a nice marriage of engineering. So many of the folks at the agency come from an engineering background, be it biomedical, be it mechanical, electrical, chemical engineers, a lot of those. So it's really, it's a great combination of thinking tactically through how to solve problems, how to be innovative in terms of getting information that can address certain problems. And I was just out of my master's, and it just seemed to be a great ground to learn and grow. And note that you're not actually, I mean, it's the engineering mindset, but you're also working with a team. And I think a lot of engineers, you thrive by working in teams. So at FDA, you were working with a very interdisciplinary team that complemented what you might not have, say, as a clinician or as a traditional scientist. But that mindset, many of the lead reviewers were the engineers in actual fact. So I don't think I answered your question of how I transitioned into policy, but maybe through the conversation we'll get there. But I think it was a great place to combine and grow and then figure out where else I wanted to move, which brings in the policy and the public health piece.
Absolutely. And we'll have to bring you back and have an in-depth discussion on whether we should have fluoride in the public water or not.
Quick answer, yes. Not that I'm a public health practitioner. You're going to have a lot of disclaimers, right?
But I'm curious, though. I mean, from the outside in, a lot of times the agency, FDA, is considered to be a bit of a black box. And as someone who is trained in biomedical materials, clearly then stepping into the world of regulatory, did you have a good sense of how the FDA operated when you stepped into the role, or was regulatory kind of a new concept for you?
It was a new concept, and I don't think like right now though, we've evolved, and there are actually master's programs. I think there's some undergrad programs that focus solely on regulatory. And I'm going to show my bias here. I actually think if we put our regulatory hat and thought about risk management throughout any process and in any specialty, we'd probably have better outcomes as relates to whatever you're driving at.
Yes.
So it was learning it. It was learning it through doing it. So I'm a believer in do one, see one, do one, teach one, add and whatever number of ends on top of that. But it was the understanding of regulatory science and what that means and what the impact of our decisions were as reviewers came along with the job as you're working on the job, and it's being surrounded by folks who've been doing it much longer that brought us up to speed. And I think you need to have spent at a minimum 6 to 8 years at the agency to really appreciate what regulatory science is, to really appreciate how you look at a product to weigh up benefit outweighing risk. Um, and we're in a very evolving climate.
Right.
And I think you also need to have worked across the different functionalities within the agency to get an appreciation of how everybody's piece fits into this bigger puzzle,
Right.
to move innovations forwards, to then ensure as products get to market, they remain safe and effective. So did I know what FDA did and how they did their work? I learned that on the go. And I think it's like a continuous evolving space, which is what we need, like that continuous learning model. So I think I have a good grasp of it now, but you got to still keep up with the new policies, the new regulations, the new uh, what's the word I'm looking for? The new guidances that are coming out to really stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, and you touched on a term that I think is really interesting, which is the cross-functional nature of the work. And when you combined regulatory with sciences, you're essentially talking about the intersection of kind of a legal framework or evaluation framework with a scientific process that supports it. So, what was that like working in such an interdisciplinary environment?
What a good question. I love that. You described it so nicely. I love it. So it's the marriage, right? So the interdisciplinary. I love team sports. I love working as a team. I believe that better decisions and outcomes are a result of having different diverse perspectives at the table to solve a problem. And that's really what FDA did. So when people come to me and say, "Oh, what do you think FDA is going to think?" I'm like, "What?" First, I'll take my 8 ball magic ball and ask it. Um, and second of all, FDA is not one person; it's a team. There are some stronger voices in the decision making approach, but and I still say we're even what I've been out since 2017. I still think sometimes as an FDA, but their role in how they make decisions should be based on valid scientific evidence, right? And then you balance what the relativity of what's how we get to valid, and then how much of that evidence, what type of evidence is needed in a pre-market and then a post-market space. So um you had to, again, it's a group decision. But then the legal framework, that's an interesting one. First of all, you need to understand how to read codes of federal regulation. Sounds boring, right? Get a CFR. We used to use books in those times. Now you got to go online. I don't think they issue them out anymore. But understanding the code of federal regulation. And again, you weren't really in a silo. You had a team to help you with that. We had our lawyers on our end helping us as well. And then it's really about leaning into benefit outweighing risk and being very patient centered. And there has to be something clinically meaningful in terms of driving why we're working in a space, right? Innovation. How are we really protecting and promoting public health, which is the large overall mission or mandate of FDA. And then each center has their specific vision and mission, but it's under that umbrella of protect and promote public health. And what it shows from what you said is you need all types of stakeholders in that ecosystem coming to work together to really achieve that mission.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know
that
if I answered your question.
No, no, you're definitely getting to it. And you mentioned the terminology, which I think goes to the mandate safe and effective, which is such a, I think, a critical mandate to have, and one that I think the agency takes very seriously, and also considers multiple constituents in determining whether something meets that threshold of being what's safe and effective. But of course, that could mean different things to different people. So, how does the agency kind of go through the process of establishing what is the mark of safe and effective for a particular device or technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, FDA regulates is on a uh, benefit risk profile, benefit outweighing risk. And within CDRH, again, we're just talking about the device space. We have three different classifications. Class one being the lowest risk, class three, the highest risk, those life sustaining devices. And don't assume that it's all implantable devices meet that level of class three. That's not the case. And then class two is what we call the bread and butter. Those are the low to moderate risk. Those are where people, you've heard terms 510K or pre-market notification thrown about. Um, and it's all driven by, again, that exciting CFR Code of Federal Regulations, where you have a clear identification and then you have like the classification, the requirements. And within that, it will list, you'll have to have general controls, which would be a lot within the market manufacturing controls, within how you're addressing complaints handling, your quality system. Most of those are required. And then with that comes registration listing. That's just the standard. It's a database that is a free for all, in my opinion, but you can register and list your product, right? And that's where FDA decides who potentially they're going to go and inspect or audit. But once you register and list, you're saying, I have a medical device and I believe I am under this classification and this product code. So along with those classes, there's certain requirements. General controls being a standard across all. Then you have special controls, and those typically are for those class two devices, the 510Ks. There's a lot of different guidance documents on that. When de novos are granted, they're also considered, it's establishing a new code of federal regulation, but it's also comes with special controls that become part of that code of federal regulation. So this kind of lays out the requirements when you were saying what kind of evidence is needed.
Right.
That's why at the front, when I was said, if we applied that risk management thinking, you always got to think about what are the risks based on user needs, design inputs, and then how I mitigate for those risks. And
Right.
that's that within the special controls. If you need clinical data, animal data, bench testing, if there's a control that's managed through labeling, right? If there's a training aspect. So all of that's pretty much laid out. There's a lot of good guidances out there where FDA is trying to be very transparent and forward thinking as relates to what we believe, the kind of evidence we need to ensure that something is safe and effective, both in pre-market, post-market. There's some post-market mandate. It's a whole slew of tools that FDA can utilize to ensure that products are safe and effective. And then again, like I said, that post-market piece is really critical because that's where the safety signals come into play. That's
Right.
where you might say if you need to recall a product or if you need to put safety communications out. But those are signals that we then tee in. Again, I say we, well, manufacturers should for sure, but that's really where FDA tees in to determine if they need to adjust regulations or thinking or requirements. So it's a full, we call it total product life cycle. It's a full cycle approach that we have different specialities within the agency coming together to ensure that big mission mandate. And that's in a way a similar thinking for manufacturers to apply. How do you ensure safety and effectiveness and think about a total product life cycle approach to getting innovations to market?
Yeah, and it seems as though FDA has become more and more interested and willing and open to post-market surveillance in a clinically driven way, meaning that perhaps your follow-up period might be 1 or 2 years, and you're able to show a nice signal of safety and effectiveness, and then FDA will say, well, this is a very innovative technology. We think that you're starting to show benefit versus risk. we'll let you on the market, we'll approve the device, and then we're going to surveil you in a very clinically driven way going forward. So it seems like that post-market aspect seems to be more and more important and something that the agency is more and more interested in exploring.
I think you're right. I think it's always been a part of the process, like especially in PMAs, you typically have a post-market approval study. And I think where you're getting at is this ability of how they weigh up. Again, it was this benefit risk thinking, how they weigh up what amount of evidence we need in the pre-market space to give us enough assurance to safely get this to patients and maybe monitor for maybe longer term outcomes or potential other safety aspects or even effectiveness aspects in the post-market space, and either within an actual post-market study or within the use of registries or some other forms of valid, like you're saying, valid scientific evidence that can circle back to from a like innovator side or manufacturer side can inform iterations, improvements, expanded claims, right, on their end. So yes, absolutely. And I think they're also the big piece of that post-market data, real world evidence or real world data, again, more buzzwords, but how can we collect that to circle it back into regulatory decision making? How can we use that information per se to expand claims on already cleared approval granted device? Um, and again, I think the key piece is centering around patients. Does
Right.
this really help improve outcomes for patients?
Yes. And to that end, it also feels as though the agency has become more interested in exploring and validating patient reported outcomes. So these are outcomes that might not be clinically driven per se, but are reported by the patients. And so really kind of taking that patient experience into mind was this patient reported outcomes, so-called PRO, something that was often discussed within the agency.
Yeah, I love that because again, we talk about patients, right? If we're in healthcare, we're in it for. I think we're in it for service, and it's about the patients. So PROs, patient-reported care outcomes, are actually in many cases and in certain specialities accepted as valid clinical endpoints. And there's validated tools, of course, out there to support these PROs. And there's certain groups within the center that it's more common and seeing that PROs can be a endpoint to validate safety effectiveness of a device. The other piece is we again, regulators tend to be risk averse. Rightfully so. We have a mandate. We should play that gatekeeper approach. I honestly believe in that. Yes, we want to help innovations get to market, but we are mandated to ensure that they're safe and effective. And although I like to give the benefit of the doubt, um, not all manufacturers or not all folks are focused on that. They're focused on maybe a return on investment, the fastest way to market, and not thinking long term, strategic. So that's why you have FDA there. They're checks and balances for a reason. So we recognize that, and then we saw, okay, patients tend to be more willing, and in certain diseases and conditions, to accept a greater risk. Again, it's the trade-offs of benefit risk. So how can we help actually get products that are meaningful and endpoints that matter to patients to be a part of our thinking when we're regulating? And that's where like innovators and companies need to come to play. And that's how can you actually innovate um, for the unique needs of patients and end users? How can you bring that patient voice throughout the total product life cycle from like concept to the prototyping and throughout? And they've done a really nice job. And honestly, a lot of this with the patient preference information, along with PROs, and how do you develop a validated patient preference study to then feed that to the agency to support benefit risk profile decisions, was really a big brainchild out of I worked on it initially, and then Dr. Tava took it to another level with a team. And then the other thing about FDA is you have champion, and then you have the people behind the work. So when I say it's team, it's truly a team that's driving at either developing these new policies or new programs to meet innovation where it's at, kind of how it's evolving. But I love where CDRH just centers around the patient. So yes, PROs, patient preference information, should be a validated factor to inform the benefit risk decision, regulatory decision approach.
Yeah, no, it's really nice to see that patient voice being incorporated. And of course, you still have to live up to the mandate, but the patient preferences, the patient reported outcomes, I think it's all been really nice to see more integrated in the clinical assessment of some of these technologies. And so you mentioned earlier that you had served in the role of a senior reviewer or reviewer. What does that role look like within the context of the FDA if you're serving as a reviewer?
Yeah. So most people who enter the agency actually enter into that role. Typically, you're kind of a little bit of a project manager. I said typically we'd be engineers, so you're playing maybe that technical expertise piece. And then you divide out the review if there's clinical data or if there's like unknown clinical information or very focused there. We'll have a medical officer is what they'd call them as a team player. Could also potentially, if there's statistical information, have a statistician. We may have a scientist if it's some novel material, someone from the Office of Science and Engineering laboratories. So it's a real team effort. You might have a co-engineer on board, or if it was some chemical, mechanical, biocomp expert. So you have this very diverse and interdisciplinary team. But as lead reviewer, you're kind of managing that team, and you're making sure they get the whole package. You're making sure you're driving behind questions. If they've reviewed it, they always come back to you. You have this additional information request. It's rare that you won't have that. You might go into interactive review, but FDA will have questions and clarifications. That funnels through you as a lead reviewer as well. You're the main, I mean, this is what's really important for sponsors, right? And manufacturers. You're that main conduit into the agency, right?
Right.
You should know this submission pretty well. And then rely on the experts around you to help inform based on what section or what area of technical expertise they bring. So you have a lot. You have a lot. It's pretty big job,
Yeah.
but you're not alone. Hopefully,
I'm just picturing you coordinating all of these different factions and perspectives and expertise.
are you really?
Yeah, you have to learn a ton, I'm sure. I'm sure.
It is. Yes. So it's
So,
fun.
so ultimately, you were at FDA for a little over 12 years. And over the past several years, you've become a leading voice in regulatory medtech strategy. What are some of the common mistakes you see companies making? And any advice that you would give to companies that are starting to go through the regulatory process with FDA?
They don't make any mistakes. I believe in learning from your mistakes. So I think again, everyone's really well intentioned and everybody wants to solve for a problem. So the one thing I always ask when I engage with clients, and I like to call them partners, because if I'm engaging with you, I believe in your technology and then the team aspect as well. But that needs-based innovation is really important. And then to really validate that there's a need, most importantly, hopefully a clinical need, you need to have flushed that out. And I always say a well-defined problem is a half-solved problem. And that's really public health thinking. And if you did an MPH at Hopkins, we spent 2 weeks on campus at the start of articulating on this MPH, just doing public health solving, problem solving, because you have to define the problem. And it's literally needed 2 weeks of just defining the problem. And you don't do it, you know, in a vacuum. You have to do your whole analysis and understanding and stakeholder interviews, and there's literature and so forth. So that's where I think companies can do a better job of truly defining what problem they're solving and for whom,
Right.
right? And understanding where your technology, your product, your software, your wearable, whatever it is, where it fits in that clinical workflow and within that patient journey for whatever disease or condition. So I think if people took the time to really do that and speak to the relevant stakeholders, again, center around patients, so you might be speaking to patients, right?
Yeah.
Um, to truly then determine what pain point you're solving and for whom, and then how your product fits into that fully. And then what it's not going to address as well. I think understand what you're not like. Don't promise the world and not deliver on the minimum. Like I'm like the more focused and specific you are, I think the more clearer pathway to market you'll have.
Mm,
All of that comes with developing a regulatory strategy. And I think you've heard me say this before. Having a predicate in parentheses does not make a regulatory strategy.
right. Yes. Well, so I'm curious then, because I think the for whom part of what you mentioned is really critical. And so do you find yourself often advising partners to narrow the scope of the patients they're seeking to treat such that it's so clear that they'll be able to show safety and effectiveness in that group and sort of make the argument start here. Maybe it's a more narrow scope of what you ultimately want to get to, but we know that we can show benefit versus risk in this patient population. And then we can expand over time. Is that often a conversation you find yourself having?
Relatively. So that's a great thinking. That's what we call a stepwise approach, right? Like really hone in. I'm also a fan of what are your aspirational claims? What is your North Star? Where do you really want to go? But what we're trying to tee up is a reasonable pathway to get you there. Because your aspirational claims may require extensive amounts of evidence
Right.
that you can't say, I mean, the big one right now, race for. And you need to show some proof points of success. So I think I'm not saying don't think of the future. And ultimately, if that's only where your product is going to be most meaningful, then let's create that path. But that's where that strategic thinking comes into play. But if there is a narrower or more focused or more imminent patient population that can benefit, then let's start there. And I also ask, what is the biggest need?
Right.
Like, where is the unmet need? And are you looking at that? Because that can also open up opportunities and markets for you, right?
Right.
So I think the more specific you can be upfront, potentially the easier your pathway or the simpler. But it doesn't mean you don't go for your ultimate goal, right? But money and time are such a critical piece to startups specifically, and I'm sure in big company like where you come out of a lot. But how do you use that most effectively? I mean, it's like sometimes they say go slow to be able to go fast, right?
You seen anyone take that stepwise approach in a really powerful way where you say, wow, that's the way to do it?
Yeah, I think there's many examples out there, and I work heavily in the women's health space. And one very easy one I think people can get a grasp on is, say, if you go for a RX, like it's a prescription device, then you move to a prescription OTC, and then maybe you just go directly to OTC being over the counter device. But because you can establish a bolus or pool of evidence to show, yes, there is some clinical effectiveness. You're also on from an RX, like on the prescription, there's an oversight of a trained clinician, right? That's saying this product is necessary and has the likelihood to be beneficial. So you're managing some risk there. And then eventually you can start to expand claims. So that's a simple one, really, as going from just prescription clinician oversight to maybe direct to consumer over the counter, where you're saying, I recognize I have this condition like self selection, and this product is going to be beneficial for me.
Right. So, in essence, what you're doing is you're coming up with a concept or a path to manage risk. And part of managing risk in this particular example would be through distribution. And so, by providing evidence that you manage risk, it gives you a much more straightforward pathway. And then over time, product as a market, it shows that it continues to hold up from a safety perspective, and you can move on from there.
Exactly.
So you launched a company nearly 2 years ago. You provide regulatory, clinical, and quality expertise. Take us inside your decision to launch your own firm. What did that process look like?
It was exciting. Do I consider myself an entrepreneur now?
Okay.
I get asked that question. I think the decision was fairly easy. Um, in terms of I reached a tipping point. And I launched it with my partner, Kelly Cardy. And we say we're very complementary, different, but very complementary. I come from heavy FDA policy development. She's heavy industry, over 25 years there, from like early startups to some of the largest publicly traded companies. Um, and she's taken products from actual concept to removing them off the market. So seeing that whole TPLC approach. And I think that was the beautiful coming together of these different perspectives and how powerful they are at helping partners and innovators really solve problems and asking some of those questions up front to help them really narrow down on their strategy. And we just wanted to partner and lean into us to products, charities, people, because behind every good product is the people that we wanted to work with. And that heavy focus is heavily on women and on people of color, where they have kind of different journeys to how they get a product to market, how they raise, how they're seen as innovators, and we wanted to help problem solve for them. So we love solving problems, is what we say, and we wanted to pick the most challenging problems, most exciting problems, because we see them as opportunities to help people figure out how to really get that product through the process and to the market and to the patients and the clinicians that can benefit from them.
And I'd love to talk a little bit about some other of your entrepreneurial endeavors. But first, I wanted to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which had to do with if you have an innovative technology focusing on a true unmet need, ways that you might be able to push it forward. And one of the ways that we often hear about is this breakthrough designation. Could you tell us a little bit about what is the breakthrough designation? Does it really help? Is it something that you recommend to innovative device companies?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the typical, it depends. That's the typical regulatory answer, right? I think every tool or every initiative program has a place. And again, you need to be thoughtful and strategic in figuring out, is this tool appropriate for what I'm trying to achieve from a business perspective? And I think what I failed to say is should hopefully come across is you shouldn't tie your business strategy to your regulatory strategy. It's vice versa. You should have a business strategy and a goal, again, your aspiration claims or whatever North Star you're shooting to. And you should have develop a regulatory strategy to support that. Hence, if you use a stepwise approach, right? And there's so many other factors that dial into your decision making. So how does it fit into there? So don't just say, I need a 510K or I just need to do this because, like, let's think about it thoughtfully. And that's similar with breakthrough. I need breakthrough because investors want it. Okay, there's also time and money. You don't have to pay a fee to submit a breakthrough request to the agency, but there's a time commitment, right? You have to develop a thoughtful package to help support that argument that your breakthrough device or technology. And then there's the 60 days that FDA has to review it. And that's by statute, it's a 60-day review time. And by the way, if you're denied the first time, it doesn't prevent you submitting another time. That's another question we get. But Breakthrough was a program that was really designed to try and expedite these breakthrough technologies. And to be considered a breakthrough technology, you had to have the likelihood of being more effective, not safe, more effective than standard of care for treating or diagnosing an irreversibly debilitating or life-threatening condition. Big words. We love words, long words at our agency, and then we love acronyms. So I didn't use acronyms there. So you have to show the likelihood of being more effective, and the way you do that is by showing the likelihood of technical success and the likelihood of clinical success. And then FDA has a slew of criteria. And the first one is, do you meet that life-threatening, irreversibly debilitating condition? And one thing I'll throw out there, many people think, oh, I've got a device that's treating or diagnosing or detecting heart failure.
Right.
Uh-uh. Heart failure, what type of heart failure? At what stage of heart failure? So you think heart failure by default, oh, it is life-threatening, irreversibly debilitating. But again, that's why I'm saying you need to be thoughtful in how you meet that definition. And then there's 4 other criteria where you have to either be a breakthrough technology, better than what's currently available. There's no other current standard or technology or product available, and you're in the best interest of patients. You don't have to meet all 4, you just have to meet one of them. By default, you think you meet D because hopefully you're in the best interest of patients, but you need data to support that. So it's not an insignificant package. And a lot of times FDA has shifted. There were a lot of breakthroughs granted early on.
Yes.
And it's somewhat dipped. And then even if you look at the breakdown by offices, cardiovascular is way leading, right? You might think, oh, there's greater burden of need for breakthrough technologies there, but I might argue there's a greater burden or need within, say, women traditional or diseases or conditions that just distinctly impact women. I might say maternal health, for example.
And
And there's a very limited number granted there. So FDA's done a pretty good job at trying to be transparent, and they have a breakthrough website. They show what products have been granted breakthrough. But what's also really important to know, if you're granted breakthrough, that doesn't mean you're at market. You have to
right.
be fairly early on. And now you're supposedly going to have a more senior and seasoned team from FDA working with you more closely. There's other avenues to have higher rate of communication with them. But again, I just say it's very much dependent on which office, which division, which branch, and how does it fit into your larger strategy of getting that product to market to move your needle forward? And is it not, and hopefully it's not distracting from something else? And can you truly benefit from that partnership with the agency, depending on where you are in your product development? So it's one other tool that is something good to think about. And what I liked as well, a couple of years ago, they introduced a health equity piece to the breakthrough. So if you were developing a technology, a device that would address either access, say, or address a disease or condition that disproportionately impact a certain group or historically marginalized group, FDA would also give additional consideration to drive that under the breakthrough program.
Right. Right. And that takes me really to my next question, which comes back to Netta the entrepreneur and some of the other activities you've been engaged with. So by last count, you've co-founded at least 3 organizations, and these are all driving initiatives to ensure access to health technologies. Tell us about those organizations and what makes you so passionate about access.
So it's access, but and in terms of getting to access, have we really developed a meaningful product, right? So the thesis behind, and I think I tried to talk about this up front, but having a diverse group of folks at a table to help solve a problem. And that really stems from MedTech Color, where we have a simple but a complex mission, and it's really to diversify the MedTech industry. And that's not only on the shop floor, but that's through to leadership, the folks who potentially hold the keys to the monies, the resources, and even the championship piece. They're saying, yes, we're going to focus on this problem because it matters. And if you don't have a leadership team that's reflective of the communities that you're innovating for or that could benefit from your innovations, we're just going to keep developing products and innovations that actually lead to additional inequities. So that's that big, like I said, simple, diversified medtech industry. It's extremely complex. And I think it just stems from a lot of history here where systems weren't built to be inclusive. So that's one big one. If we have more leadership that's representative, not just from a gender, sex perspective, but from a race, ethnicity. I'm also a big believer on an age piece. Just even seeing the leadership, political leadership in New York now, I am so excited. We need more young people at
Yeah,
the table making decisions, because we need to move with the times, as they say. So I think you need to have all voices at the table in that sense. So that was MedTech Color, and we continue to hopefully strive and lean into that effort. Um, and by having that, ultimately, hopefully, it leads to access and better products. And then the other one, like I founded a few others, but women's health advocates under that umbrella. I co-founded that with Liz and a group of us who are just we're women, and women make up 51% of the population, and our voice counts. And I think our goal really, and like Liz and I share this really strongly, is create a platform where people can rise together and where people's voices are heard. Helping people find their voices, I think, is a really deep one as well. Education, I mean, education is so critical. Like, even how do you advocate? How can you help inform policies that really, again, I sound like a broken record, but center around patients and
right,
improved outcomes? How can we educate ultimately the leaders who make these decisions, but they don't necessarily look like the communities that need these policies or these resources or these monies or these focus. Um, and I hopefully like leading with the goal that people are well intentioned and sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And if we can help
right,
um, raise awareness, and we've always like we've been doing the Women's Health Advocates our second year. We've done a lot of Hill Days, Capitol Hill Days in DC. We're also supporting some state Hill Days. We're bringing advocates who with lived conditions, like, and I think that lived experience is so powerful. We're all patients, bringing their voice, their story to Capitol Hill, to senators, to Congress, and ultimately, actually, to their staffers who tend to do most of the work, right? They're the ones who have the ears of these leaders, and your representatives. And then just even enabling folks to let them know you can call your representative, you can send emails, you can send letters. And we've gone as far as developing draft letters on certain issues, um, or legislation. And you can just put in your zip code and it populates up, and you can even personalize the letter as to why this issue or this policy or this legislation is of real importance to you. Again, putting your lived experience, but really kind of just trying to activate and mobilize folks as Liz likes to go, it's a movement. It's not a moment, it's a movement. And it's like it's a lifetime movement, because we have been disenfranchised for such a long time as women in healthcare, and just continue to see worse outcomes. And we have some of the worst statistics in terms of healthcare and health outcomes that are preventable if we
right.
just had a little bit more focus.
Yeah, and I love how the a lot of the focus is on really education and recognizing that the majority of us are very well intended. It just might be that we need to widen our aperture to be able to see things that maybe our lived experience have not allowed us to.
Exactly.
That's incredible, and I'm looking forward to continuing to see the impact of the organizations that you're involved with.
And it really is about people coming together to see the change we want to see. And I think it's even more so now in this environment, like this geopolitical environment, sadly, that we need to unite for good. So, well, thank you for that.
Pleasure. So, as we continue to advance and we are pushing forward with innovation that can be safe and effective, what are some of the areas that you are excited to see expand and develop over the next several years in terms of healthcare innovation?
I think there's so many, and I was on a panel recently. I said, "Can we do a bingo AIML?" Because it's like just everyone wants to throw that out, right? Um, But I'm gonna go to women's health. So maternal health, the basic, health is a human right, right? And one of the basic ones is for women to be able to carry a baby and deliver that baby in a healthy manner and thrive and see the baby through and like through the postpartum period and onwards. And that's not happening in the US. So black and brown women drive 3 to 4 times the rate of white women in this country, and 83% of those are preventable causes. So there's a real opportunity to innovate. I may have sounded like I was being sarcastic earlier, but like really with breakthrough, there's needs. And I'm a biased at MedTech because I think you can iterate and you can innovate faster within the device space. And that's a real nice opportunity, again, centering around making we have safe quality products. So I'm excited to see women lean into leading, bringing their lived experience and founding companies to address some of these areas that have historically been ignored. So that gets me, and there's a few partners we're working with that are just phenomenal, and so committed, and just wanting to see that we can get these simple and really meaningful products. So it's like less invasive products, like within the wearable space, um, to patients as well. Uh, that's one place. And then in pediatrics, I wish the thinking would shift. Like if we had healthier children, you'd ultimately prevent upstream poorer health outcomes.
Right.
But that's one area that's always been ignored reinvestment because there's no ROI. And that might be tied to reimbursement capabilities as well, or who's going to pay for it. But if the thinking really would shift to, can we just have a healthier population, have a thinking shift to prevention rather than just treatment? I think, well, it would be a much different space. And unfortunately, I don't know if our healthcare system is set up for that. It's broken. I just think it needs to be rebuilt for w- for better outcomes, for patient-centered outcomes, not payment-centered outcomes. So
Right. There's that old comparison about how we live in the healthcare system where essentially you pay the clinician when you're sick. But what if you thought about reversing it and you pay the clinician while you're healthy and you actually don't pay while you're sick? Well, the motivation is to prevent you from being sick. It's a
I love that.
kind of a simple ancient concept, but it's interesting how we've evolved to where we are today.
I love that. I wish we'd all think like that, right? I wish let's create our own system.
Yeah. Yes. But I'm so excited to hear how you're partnering with these companies and these organizations to really advance healthcare for the entire community. It's really, really powerful and it's very inspiring. Well, Netta, this has been an inspiring conversation. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your perspectives and thoughts from working at the FDA all the way through to starting your own company. Really appreciate having you on.
Well, thank you, Omari, and thank you for creating a platform where people with lived experience and expertise can come to enjoy a conversation with you and share that with others. So thank you. I'm right back at you, mate.
Truly, truly, truly my pleasure. And thanks to all of you for joining us today on Powering the Future with Them. If this conversation inspired you, follow the show and share it with your MedTech community. I'm Omari Bouknight. Stay inspired and keep innovating.